The Hidden Side of Things, by Charles Webster Leadbeater. Chapter 1. Understanding the Hidden Forces of Nature. The designation occultism has, for a protracted period, been subject to misinterpretation. To the uninitiated, it was, until quite recently, deemed synonymous with sorcery. Its adherents were envisioned as practitioners of the dark arts, draped in scarlet vestments inscribed with arcane symbols, encompassed by macabre accoutrements, a black feline attending them, while brewing prescribed compounds via diabolical incantations. Even amongst those whose education has elevated them above such superstition, a significant degree of confusion continues to endure. The etymological origin of the term, stemming from that which is concealed, ought to elucidate that it denotes the investigation of the hidden. Nevertheless, many persist in repudiating it as inane or impracticable, linking it with vacuous fantasies, divination, hysteria, necromancy, or the vain quest for the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone. Numerous scholars, who ought to command a superior comprehension, incessantly intimate that the concealed facet of existence is intentionally obscured, as if knowledge thereof were being selfishly sequestered by a privileged elite. In veracity, nothing is sequestered from humanity save by its own constraints. As each individual progresses in evolution, his perception of the cosmos dilates, permitting him to witness an ever-increasing measure of its magnificence and beauty. One might interpose the objection that at each momentous initiation characterizing the neophyte's advancement along the superior path, a distinct, novel segment of knowledge is conveyed. This is indisputably the case, yet such erudition can only be bestowed because the initiate has evolved sufficiently to apprehend it. It is no more withheld from the general populace than the axioms of geometry are withheld from a child who has yet to master elementary arithmetic. When said child becomes capable of grasping more intricate principles, the instructor stands prepared to educate him. Similarly, when a man qualifies himself to receive the verities unveiled in a specific initiation, he is immediately granted admission to it. The sole method for acquiring the capacity for superior knowledge is to commence by studying and comprehending the conditions that currently encompass us, and to regulate our lives sagaciously in accordance with the truths we ascertain. Occultism, therefore, constitutes the study of the concealed aspects of nature, or more precisely, the study of nature in toto, rather than that circumscribed portion accessible to contemporary scientific inquiry. At humanity's present stage of evolution, the greater part of nature remains unknown to the majority, for they have cultivated but a fraction of their innate faculties. The ordinary individual thus constructs his understanding upon inadequate foundations, molding his conduct according to a few known natural laws. Consequently, his philosophy and practice are necessarily imperfect. The occultist, adopting a more expansive perspective, recognizes and contemplates the forces of the higher planes, invisible to the materialist, and thereby governs his existence in harmony with the complete system of nature's laws, rather than with the fragmentary comprehension of them possessed by conventional science. It is arduous for one who knows nothing of the occult to apprehend the vastness and profundity of his own limitations. The optimal manner to symbolize these restrictions is to envision a form of consciousness even more confined than our own, and to consider how it would diverge from us. Postulate that a consciousness existed capable of perceiving only solid matter, to which liquids and gases were entirely non-existent, just as the etheric, astral, and mental states of matter appear to the ordinary person. Such a being could never formulate an accurate conception of the world. It would observe that solid substances were continually altering, absent any discernible cause. A precipitation of rain, for instance, would transform the condition of the earth, rendering it heavier and softer, yet the rationale for this modification would remain utterly beyond comprehension. The displacement of sand by the wind would be equally inexplicable, as the medium generating the motion would be unknown. Without extending these examples further, it is evident that such a consciousness could possess only the most incomplete understanding of the world surrounding it. What we fail to perceive, however, is that our present level of awareness stands just as far beneath that of a developed being as this imagined consciousness would stand beneath our own. Students of theosophy are at least theoretically cognizant that every aspect of existence possesses a concealed facet, and they are aware that, in most instances, this unseen side holds far greater significance than the portion visible to physical sight. To articulate the same concept from another vantage point, the senses, by means of which we acquire all our data regarding external objects, are as yet imperfectly developed. Therefore, the intelligence obtained is partial. That which we observe in the world about us is by no means all that exists to be seen, and a man who will take the trouble to cultivate his senses will discover that, in proportion as he succeeds, life will become fuller and richer for him. For the devotee of nature, of art, of music, a vast domain of incredibly intensified and exalted pleasure lies close at hand, if he will equip himself to enter upon it. Above all, for the lover of his fellow man, there exists the possibility of far more intimate comprehension and, therefore, far wider utility. We are but halfway up the ladder of evolution at present, and thus our senses are merely half evolved. Yet, it is possible for us to accelerate our ascent of that ladder, possible, through diligent labor, to render our senses now what all men's senses shall be in the distant future. The man who has succeeded in accomplishing this is frequently termed a seer or a clairvoyant. An exquisite term, that, clairvoyant. It denotes one who sees clearly, but it has been horribly misused and degraded, such that the populace associates it with all manner of trickery and imposture, with Romanes who, for sixpence, will inform a maidservant of the hair color of the duke destined to wed her, or with establishments in Bond Street where, for a guinea fee, the veil of the future is purportedly lifted for more aristocratic clients. All this is irregular and unscientific. In many instances, it is mere charlatanry and barefaced robbery. However, not invariably so. To foresee the future up to a certain point is a possibility. It can be done, and it has been done scores of times. Furthermore, some of these irregular practitioners unquestionably do, at times, possess flashes of higher vision, although they usually cannot rely upon manifesting them at will. Yet, behind all this ambiguity, there lies a bedrock of fact, something which can be approached rationally and studied scientifically. It is as the result of many years of such study and experimentation that I state emphatically what I have inscribed above, that it is possible for men to develop their senses until they can perceive much more of this wonderful and beautiful world in which we reside than is ever suspected by the untrained average man, who lives contentedly in the midst of Sumerian darkness and styles it light. 2,500 years ago, the greatest of Indian teachers, Gautama the Buddha, said to his disciples, "Do not complain and weep and pray, but open your eyes and see. The truth is all about you, if you will only remove the bandage from your eyes and look. And it is so wonderful, so beautiful, so far beyond anything that men have ever dreamt of or prayed for, and it is forever and forever." He assuredly intended far more than this of which I am writing now, but this is a step on the way towards that glorious goal of perfect realization. If it does not yet communicate quite the entire truth, at any rate, it affords us a substantial portion of it. It eradicates for us a host of common misconceptions, and clarifies for us many points which are considered as mysteries or enigmas by those who are as yet uninstructed in this lore. It demonstrates that these phenomena appeared as enigmas and problems to us solely because, heretofore, we perceived but a fraction of the facts. We were observing the various matters from an inferior vantage point, viewing them as isolated and disjointed fragments, rather than ascending to an elevation from which they are intelligible as components of a mighty whole. It resolves instantaneously numerous inquiries that have been the subject of contentious debate, such, for example, as the question of the continued existence of man subsequent to physical dissolution. It elucidates many of the arcane assertions made by ecclesiastical institutions. Furthermore, it dissipates our ignorance and eradicates our dread of the unknown by providing us with a rational and orderly scheme. Beyond these considerations, it unveils a novel realm regarding our quotidian existence, a realm which remains, nevertheless, an integral portion of the familiar one. It illustrates, as I commenced by stating, that there exists a concealed aspect to all things, and that our most mundane actions frequently engender consequences of which, absent this study, we would have remained entirely oblivious. Through this medium, we comprehend the rationale of that which is commonly termed telepathy. For we perceive that, precisely as there exist undulations of heat, light, or electricity, so too are there waves generated by thought, although these dwell within a subtler grade of matter than the former and are, consequently, imperceptible to our physical faculties. By examining these vibrations, we discern the mechanism of thought and ascertain that it constitutes a tremendous potency for beneficence or malevolence, a power which every one of us wields unconsciously to some degree, but which we may employ with vastly greater efficacy when we comprehend its operations. Further investigation discloses the method by which so-called thought forms are constituted and indicates how these may be advantageously utilized for the benefit of both ourselves and others in a multitude of distinct manners. The occultist meticulously investigates all these invisible effects and, as a consequence, possesses a far more complete cognizance than other men regarding the ramifications of his actions. He possesses superior information concerning existence, and he exercises his prudence by modifying his mode of living in accordance with his knowledge. In numerous respects, our contemporary existence differs from that of our progenitors in the medieval era, simply because our knowledge exceeds theirs. We have discovered specific laws of hygiene. Sagacious men live in conformity with that understanding, and, therefore, the average duration of life is decidedly greater now than it was during the Middle Ages. There remain, however, those who are foolish or unenlightened, who either are unacquainted with the laws of health or are negligent in their observance. They opine that because pathogenic microorganisms are invisible to them, they are therefore of no consequence, and they refuse credence to novel concepts. Such individuals are the primary sufferers when an epidemic disease manifests, or when some exceptional strain is imposed upon the community. They endure suffering quite unnecessarily because they lag behind the times. Yet, they injure not merely themselves through their neglect. The conditions engendered by their ignorance or carelessness frequently introduce infection into a district that might otherwise have remained exempt from it. The subject upon which I am currently discoursing is precisely the same phenomenon, merely transposed to a different plane. The microscope revealed pathogenic agents. The intelligent man profited by this discovery and reorganized his life, whereas the unintelligent man paid no heed and proceeded as before. Clairvoyance reveals thought force and numerous other previously unsuspected powers. Once again, the intelligent man benefits from this discovery and rearranges his existence accordingly. Once again, the unintelligent man disregards the new discoveries. Once again, he presumes that what he cannot perceive can possess no significance for him. And once again, he continues to suffer quite needlessly, for he remains behind the times. Not only does he frequently endure positive affliction, but he also forfeits a vast proportion of the pleasures of existence. In painting, music, poetry, literature, religious ceremonies, and the beauties of nature, there is invariably a hidden aspect, a plenitude, a completeness transcending the merely physical. The individual who can perceive or sense this possesses a wealth of enjoyment far beyond the comprehension of one who traverses these experiences with unopened perceptions. These perceptive faculties exist within every human being, although in the majority, they remain as yet undeveloped. To unfold them generally necessitates a considerable expenditure of time and arduous labor. Yet the endeavor is exceedingly worthwhile. However, let no man undertake this exertion unless his motives are absolutely pure and unselfish. For he who seeks a wider faculty for any but the most exalted purposes shall bring upon himself a malediction rather than a benediction. Yet the man of affairs, who commands no spare time for a sustained effort to evolve the nascent powers within himself, is not thereby debarred from participating in at least some of the benefits derived from occult study, any more than the man who possesses no microscope is thereby prevented from living hygienically. The latter has not beheld the pathogenic germs, but from the testimony of the specialist, he is aware that they exist, and he understands how to guard himself against them. In precisely the same manner, a man who possesses as yet no dawning of clairvoyant vision may study the writings of those who have attained it, and in this way profit by the results of their labor. Admittedly, he cannot yet perceive all the glory and beauty which are concealed from us by the imperfection of our senses. Nevertheless, he can readily ascertain how to avoid the unseen evil and how to set in motion the unseen forces of good. Thus, long before he actually perceives them, he can conclusively demonstrate their existence to himself, just as the operator of an electric motor proves to himself the existence of electricity, although he has never beheld it and may not in the least comprehend its intrinsic nature. We must endeavor to comprehend as much as possible of the world in which we reside. We must not lag behind in the march of evolution. We must not permit ourselves to become anachronisms through a lack of interest in these new discoveries, which are, in reality, merely the presentation, from a novel point of view, of the most archaic wisdom. Knowledge is power in this instance as in every other, and in this case, as in all others, to secure the optimum results, the glorious trinity of power, wisdom, and love must ever proceed hand in hand. There exists a distinction, however, between theoretical acquaintance and actual realization. I have surmised that it might assist students somewhat toward a grasp of the realities to receive a description of the unseen aspect of certain simple transactions of everyday life as they appear to clairvoyant vision, to one, let us posit, who has developed within himself the power of perception through the astral, mental, and causal bodies. Their appearance, as perceived by means of the intuitional vehicle, is infinitely grander and more potent still, yet so entirely inexpressible that it appears futile to articulate anything concerning it. For on that plane all experience is internal rather than external to the man, and the glory and beauty thereof are no longer phenomena he observes with interest, but realities he feels in his inmost heart, because they are an intrinsic part of himself. The objective of this volume is to offer certain intimations regarding the inner side of the world as a whole and of our daily existence. We shall consider this latter subject in 3 divisions, which will resemble the conjugations of our youthful studies in being passive, middle, and active respectively. How we are influenced, how we influence ourselves, and how we influence others. We shall conclude by observing a few of the results which must inevitably flow from a wider diffusion of this knowledge regarding the realities of existence. Chapter 2. The Immortal Soul and the Cosmic Design. A broader perspective. Upon observing the world that encompasses us, we cannot conceal from our own perceptions the omnipresence of profound sorrow and suffering. It is undeniably true that a significant portion constitutes the distinct fault of the sufferers and could be readily evaded through the exercise of minimal self-control and prudent judgment. Notwithstanding, there exists a vast quantity that is not self-inflicted but manifestly derives from external origins. Frequently, it appears as though malevolence predominates and justice falters amidst the tempest and tumult of life's disarray. Consequently, many relinquish hope regarding the ultimate conclusion and query whether there truly exists any design of definite progression behind such perplexing disorder. It remains entirely a question of perspective, for the individual enmeshed within the heat of combat cannot adjudicate the strategy of the general or the trajectory of the conflict. To comprehend the engagement in its totality, one is required to withdraw from the tumult and survey the terrain from an elevated vantage point. Analogously, to grasp the strategic design of the battle of life, we must momentarily detach ourselves from it and, in contemplation, gaze down upon it from an elevation, adopting the standpoint not of the perishable somatic form but of the immortal soul. We are obliged to contemplate not merely the minute fraction of existence perceptible to our physical vision, but also the immense totality of which such a significant measure remains unobserved. Until that is accomplished, we resemble a man gazing from beneath at the underside of a magnificent and intricate tapestry currently in the process of being woven. To him, it appears as nothing other than a convoluted confusion of hues and suspended filaments, devoid of order or aesthetic beauty, and he is unable to conceive what purpose all this clamor and motion might serve. Yet when, through a comprehension of the occult side of nature, we acquire the capacity to observe from above, the pattern gradually unveils itself, and the apparent chaos becomes discernible as orderly evolution. A more potent comparison may be delineated by visualizing the perspective of a minuscule organism swept along by an irresistible current, such as that which rushes through the gorge of Niagara. Boiling, foaming, and swirling, the potency of that torrent is so immense that its center elevates several feet higher than its margins. The organism, born upon the surface, is inevitably tossed wildly amidst the effervescence, at times flung into the atmosphere, at others drawn backward within an eddy, unable to perceive the riparian boundaries and utilizing its entire strength merely to remain buoyant. To such an entity, this turmoil would appear to constitute the entire universe. How, then, could it possibly discern the destination toward which the stream is tending? However, the observer positioned upon the shore can perceive that all this apparent confusion is merely superficial, and that the essential reality is the steady, onward sweep of millions of tons of water toward the ocean. If we further postulate that the diminutive creature possesses some conception of progress and associates it with forward motion, it might well be alarmed when it discovers itself driven aside or drawn backward by an eddy. Conversely, the observer would comprehend that the apparent retreat is an illusion, for even the eddies are transported forward along with the remainder. It is no hyperbole to state that as the knowledge of the struggling organism within the current compares to that of the man observing from above, so does the comprehension of life possessed by one abiding in the world compare to that of one who perceives its concealed aspect. Yet a more refined, albeit more exacting, illustration is proffered by Mr. Hinton in his scientific romances. For the objective of his argument, he envisions a lofty wooden frame across which numerous threads are tautly stretched in every direction. If a sheet of paper is positioned horizontally within the frame such that the threads pass through it, each individual thread will puncture a minute aperture. If subsequently the frame is slowly elevated while the paper remains stationary, various results will ensue. A thread that stands perpendicular will pass through its aperture with facility, whereas one positioned at an angle will incise a slit in the paper as the frame ascends. Let us suppose that, in lieu of paper, we utilize a thin sheet of wax, sufficiently viscous to close behind each transiting thread. Then, rather than a multiplicity of slits, we shall observe a series of migrating apertures, and to an eye incapable of perceiving the threads themselves, these motions would appear erratic and incomprehensible. Certain apertures would approach one another, while others would drift apart, forming and dissolving patterns entirely contingent upon the unseen arrangement of the threads. Now, by a yet more audacious act of imagination, let us conceive not of the apertures but of the minute sections of thread momentarily occupying them, and envisage these sections as conscious atoms. They regard themselves as separate entities. They discover themselves moving without their own volition in what appears to be a labyrinth of inextricable confusion, and this bewildering dance constitutes life as they cognize it. Yet all this apparent complexity and aimless motion is, in truth, a delusion engendered by the limitation of the consciousness of those atoms, for only one extremely simple movement is genuinely occurring, the steady upward ascension of the frame as a totality. However, the atom can never comprehend that until it realizes that it is not a separated fragment, but rather an integral portion of a thread. Which phenomena serve as an allegory, and a most exquisite one, for the threads are ourselves, our true selves, our souls, and the atoms represent us within this earthly existence. So long as we confine our consciousness to the atom, and regard life solely from this terrestrial standpoint, we can never comprehend what is transpiring in the world. But if we will elevate our consciousness to the perspective of the soul, the thread of which the bodily life is merely a minute fraction and a temporary expression, we shall then perceive that there exists a splendid simplicity beneath all the complexity, a unity behind all the diversity. The complexity and the diversity are illusions generated by our limitations. The simplicity and the unity are the reality. The world in which we reside possesses a concealed aspect, for the conception of it within the mind of the ordinary individual is utterly imperfect along three quite distinct lines. First, it possesses an extension at its own level which he is at present quite incapable of appreciating. Secondly, it possesses a higher aspect which is too refined for his undeveloped perceptions. Thirdly, it possesses a meaning and a purpose of which he usually has not the faintest glimpse. To assert that we do not perceive the entirety of our world is to state the case far too feebly. What we perceive is an absolutely insignificant portion of it, beautiful though that portion may be. And just as the additional extension is infinite compared to our concept of space, and cannot be articulated in its terms, so are the scope and the splendor of the whole infinitely greater than any conception that can possibly be formed of it here, and they cannot be expressed in any terms of that fraction of the world with which we are familiar. The fourth dimension, The extension alluded to under the first heading has frequently been designated the fourth dimension. Many writers have derided this notion and denied its existence. Nevertheless, it remains an incontrovertible fact that our physical world is, in truth, a world of multiple dimensions, and that every object within it possesses an extension, however minute, in a direction which is inconceivable to us at our current stage of mental evolution. When we develop astral senses, we are brought so much more directly into contact with this extension that our minds are compelled, more or less, into recognition of it, and the more intelligent gradually advance to comprehend it. However, there exist those of lesser intellectual development who, even subsequent to death and within the astral world, cling desperately to their accustomed limitations and adopt the most extraordinary and irrational hypotheses to avoid acknowledging the existence of the higher life which they so profoundly dread. Because the most facile method for the majority to arrive at a realization of the fourth dimension of space is to cultivate within themselves the faculty of astral sight. Many individuals have come to suppose that the fourth dimension is an exclusive prerogative of the astral world. A brief contemplation reveals that this hypothesis is untenable. In its fundamental nature, there exists but one singular essence of matter within the universe, though we designate it as physical, astral, or mental, contingent upon the degree of its subdivision and the velocity of its vibration. Consequently, the dimensions of space, assuming their existence, subsist independently of the matter contained therein. Furthermore, whether such space possesses 3 dimensions, 4, or a greater number, all matter residing within it remains subject to those conditions, irrespective of our capacity to perceive them. It may perhaps facilitate our comprehension of this subject to acknowledge that what we term space constitutes a limitation of consciousness, and that there exists an exalted plane wherein a sufficiently evolved consciousness is entirely liberated from such constraint. We may endow this superior consciousness with the faculty of expression in an infinite number of directions, and subsequently postulate that each descent into a denser sphere of matter imposes upon it a supplementary restriction, thereby precluding the perception of one of these directions. We may conjecture that by the juncture at which consciousness has descended to the mental realm, only 5 of these directions remain accessible to it, that upon its further descent or outward progression to the astral level, it forfeits yet another of its faculties, thus becoming restricted to the conception of 4 dimensions, and finally, that the subsequent descent or outward motion transporting it into the physical world severs the possibility of comprehending even that 4th dimension, rendering us confined to the 3 with which we are conversant. Viewing the matter from this perspective, it is evident that the fundamental conditions of the universe have remained immutable, though our capacity for perceiving them has altered. Thus, while it is verifiable that when our consciousness functions through astral matter we are capable of perceiving a 4th dimension, which is ordinarily concealed from us whilst operating through the physical brain, we must not fall into the error of concluding that the 4th dimension pertains exclusively to the astral world, or that physical matter exists in a spatial category distinct from the astral or mental. Such a proposition is demonstrated to be unwarranted by the fact that it is possible for an individual, utilizing the physical brain, to attain through disciplined practice the faculty of comprehending certain 4-dimensional forms. I do not desire at this juncture to undertake a comprehensive examination of this captivating subject. Those who wish to pursue it further should direct their attention to the works of Mr. Charles Howard Hinton, specifically Scientific Romances and the 4th Dimension, the former volume regarding all the intriguing possibilities associated with this study, and the latter regarding the means whereby the mind may realize the 4th dimension as a verifiable fact. For our immediate purposes, It is necessary only to indicate the presence of an aspect or extension of our world which, though utterly unknown to the vast majority of mankind, demands study and consideration by those who desire to comprehend the totality of life rather than merely a diminutive fragment thereof. The higher world. There exists a concealed facet to our physical world in a secondary and superior sense, which is well known to all students of theosophy, for numerous lectures have been delivered and many tomes authored in the endeavor to delineate the astral and mental worlds, that unseen realm which interpenetrates the sphere with which we are all conversant and constitutes by far the most significant portion thereof. Considerable information regarding this higher aspect of our world has been provided in the 5th and 6th of the Theosophical Manuals, as well as in my own treatise, The Other Side of Death. Consequently, I need do no more here than offer a brief, general statement for the benefit of any reader who has not yet encountered those works. Modern physicists inform us that matter is interpenetrated by ether, a hypothetical substance which they endow with a multiplicity of apparently contradictory qualities. The occultist is aware that there exist numerous varieties of this finer, interpenetrative matter, and that certain qualities attributed to it by men of science adhere not to the matter itself, but rather to the primordial substance of which it is the negation. I do not wish here to deviate from the objective of this volume to present a lengthy disquisition upon the qualities of ether. Those who desire to investigate this subject are referred to the work entitled Occult Chemistry. Here, it must suffice to state that the true ether of space exists, precisely as scientific men have postulated, and possesses the majority of the curious and contradictory attributes ascribed to it. It is not, however, of that ether itself, but rather of matter constructed from the bubbles within it, that the inner worlds of finer substance, of which we have just spoken, are composed. That with which we are currently concerned is the fact that all matter visible to us is interpenetrated not merely by ether, but also by various categories of finer matter, and that within this finer matter there exist many gradations. To the classification nearest the physical world, occult students have assigned the appellation astral matter. The variety immediately superior has been termed mental, because from its texture is constructed that mechanism of consciousness commonly designated as the mind in man, and there exist other types finer still, with which we are not concerned at the present moment. Every portion of space with which we interact must be conceived as containing all these distinct varieties of matter. It is practically a scientific postulate that, even within the densest forms of matter, no two particles ever touch one another. Rather, each floats in isolation within its field of ether, akin to a sun in space. In precisely the same manner, each particle of the physical ether floats in a sea of astral matter, and each astral particle, in turn, suspends within a mental ocean. Thus, all these additional worlds require no more space than does this fragment we know, for in truth, they are all constituent parts of one and the same world. Man possesses within himself matter of these finer grades, and by learning to focus his consciousness therein, rather than solely within his physical brain, he may become cognizant of these inner and higher regions of the world, thereby acquiring knowledge of the most profound interest and value. The nature of this unseen world, its scenery, its inhabitants, and its possibilities are described in the works previously mentioned. It is the existence of these higher realms of nature that renders occultism possible, and few indeed are the departments of life in which their influence need not be considered. From the cradle to the grave, we stand in close relation with them during what we term our waking life. During sleep and thereafter, we are even more intimately connected with them, for our existence is then almost exclusively confined to them. Perhaps the greatest of the many fundamental changes inevitable for the man who studies the facts of life is that which is produced in his attitude towards death. This matter has been treated exhaustively elsewhere. Here I need only state that knowledge of the truth regarding death divests it of all its terror and much of its sorrow, enabling us to view it in its true proportion and to comprehend its place in the scheme of our evolution. It is perfectly possible to acquire knowledge of all these matters, rather than blindly accepting beliefs at second hand, as the majority do, and such knowledge signifies power, security, and happiness. The purpose of life. The third aspect of our world which remains concealed from the majority is the plan and purpose of existence. Most men appear to navigate their existence haphazardly, lacking any discernible objective save perhaps the purely physical struggle to accumulate wealth or attain power, owing to the vague supposition that these acquisitions will secure their happiness. They possess neither a definite theory as to why they are here, nor any certainty regarding the future that awaits them. They have not even realized that they are souls rather than bodies, and that, as such, their development constitutes part of a mighty scheme of cosmic evolution. Once this paramount truth has manifested upon a man's intellectual horizon, he undergoes that transformation which Occidental religion designates as conversion, an exquisite term that has been lamentably debased by erroneous associations. Indeed, it has frequently been employed to denote nothing more substantive than a paroxysm of emotion, hypnotically precipitated by the surging tides of agitated sentiment radiating from a frenzied multitude. Its authentic significance corresponds precisely to that which its etymology implies: a turning together with. Anterior to this event, the individual, oblivious to the monumental current of evolution, has, whilst laboring under the delusion of egoism, struggled against it. Yet, the instant the magnificence of the divine plan is revealed to his awed perception, there remains no alternative but for him to dedicate his total energies toward the advancement of its consummation, to turn and traverse alongside that resplendent stream of the love and wisdom of the deity. His singular objective thenceforth is to equip himself to serve the world, and all his cogitations and deeds are oriented toward that end. He may, under the duress of temptation, experience a momentary lapse, yet such oblivion can be but transient, and herein lies the significance of the ecclesiastical dogma asserting that the elect can never suffer ultimate failure. Discernment has descended upon him, the opening of the doors of the mind, to adopt the terminology utilized for this transformation in ancient faiths, and he now distinguishes that which is real from that which is illusory, and that which merits acquisition from that which is devoid of value. He exists as an immortal soul, a spark of the divine fire, rather than as one of the beasts that perish, to utilize a biblical phrase which, however, is factually erroneous, insofar as the beasts do not perish, save in the sense of their being reabsorbed into their group soul. Veritably, for this individual, a facet of existence has been unveiled which was hitherto concealed from his vision. It would be even more accurate to assert that now, for the first time, he has genuinely commenced to live, whereas previously he merely endured an ineffectual existence. Chapter 3. Celestial Radiations and the 7 Types of Matter. Radiations. The primary verity one must apprehend is that every existent entity emanates an influence upon its environment, whilst simultaneously accepting a perpetual reciprocation of influence therefrom. Every constituent of existence, encompassing the sun, moon, and stars, extending to angels, humanity, fauna, flora, and even the mineral kingdom, projects an incessant current of vibrations, each distinct in accordance with its intrinsic nature, operative not merely within the physical realm but within the more ethereal planes of being as well. Our corporeal faculties are capable of discerning but a restricted spectrum of these radiations. We readily perceive the thermal energy radiated by the sun or a flame. Nevertheless, we remain generally oblivious to the fact that we ourselves perpetually radiate heat. Should one extend a hand toward a radiometer, however, that sensitive instrument will respond to said thermal emission even from a distance of several feet, thereby inducing its rotation. We assert that a rose possesses fragrance whereas a daisy acts otherwise, yet the daisy liberates particles precisely as the rose does. The distinction resides solely in the circumstance that those emissions released by the daisy elude the perception of our sensory faculties. From antiquity, humanity has maintained the conviction that the sun, moon, planets, and stars exercise dominion over human affairs. In the contemporary era, this concept is frequently discarded with derision by those who have never subjected it to scrutiny. Notwithstanding, any individual who examines astrology meticulously and without bias will discover within it much that cannot be rejected as mere superstition. He shall encounter numerous errors, some indeed preposterous, yet he shall also unveil a proportion of accuracy too significant to be ascribed to coincidence. Such investigation will demonstrate that astrology is established upon a tangible, albeit imperfect, foundation. When one contemplates the immense distances segregating us from even the most proximate planets, it appears implausible to presume that they could exert any direct physical influence upon us. Furthermore, were such influence to exist, its potency should depend more upon the planet's proximity to the Earth than upon its celestial position, a factor to which astrologers seldom accord consideration. The more deeply one cogitates upon this, the less rational it appears that the planets could affect the Earth or its inhabitants in any quantifiable manner. Yet the undeniable reality remains that a theory predicated upon this apparent impossibility frequently proves accurate in practice. The elucidation may perhaps reside in the hypothesis that, just as the hands of a timepiece indicate the passage of time without causing it, the motions of the planets signify the presence of specific influences without constituting their source. Let us, therefore, investigate what insight occult knowledge affords regarding this intricate subject. The deity of the solar system. Students of the occult perceive the entirety of the solar system, with all its complexity, as the partial manifestation of a single vast conscious being, wherein every component expresses one of his aspects. He has been designated by sundry appellations. In theosophical texts, he is frequently depicted under the Gnostic title the Logos, the word that was in the beginning with God and was God, although he is now more commonly termed the solar deity. All physical constituents of the solar system, the sun with its radiant corona, the planets with their satellites, oceans, atmospheres, and the various ethers encompassing them, collectively constitute his physical body, his manifestation upon the physical plane. In like manner, the collective astral worlds, comprising both the astral spheres associated with the physical planets and those pertaining to purely astral globes throughout the system, form his astral body. Similarly, the mental worlds collectively compose his mental body, the medium through which he expresses himself upon that plane. Every atom within every realm functions as a center of his consciousness, such that not only is God omnipresent, but all that exists is, in truth, God himself. The ancient pantheistic perspective is therefore valid, albeit only partially. For while the totality of nature across all its planes is but his vesture, he yet transcends and exists beyond it all in a vast mode of being utterly unknown to us, dwelling among other rulers of other systems. Just as all our individual lives unfold within him and are indeed part of his own life, so his existence and that of the solar deities of countless other systems are contained within the still greater life of the deity of the visible universe. And if, beyond the limits of our perception, there exist other universes, then their deities too must, in the same manner, form part of one supreme consciousness embracing all. Different types of matter. Within these bodies of the solar deity upon their various levels, there exist certain distinct classes or types of matter, which are distributed with fair equity throughout the entire system. I do not allude here to our customary classification of the worlds and their subsections, a division established according to the density of the matter, whereby in the physical world, for instance, we possess the solid, liquid, gaseous, etheric, superetheric, subatomic, and atomic conditions of matter, all being physical yet differing in density. The types to which I refer constitute a totally distinct series of cross-divisions, each of which contains matter in all its different conditions. Thus, if we denote the various types by numerals, we shall ascertain solid, liquid, and gaseous matter of the first type, solid, liquid, and gaseous matter of the second type, and so forth throughout the sequence. These types of matter are as thoroughly intermingled as are the constituents of our atmosphere. Conceive of a chamber filled with air. Any decided vibration communicated to the air, such as a sound, for instance, would be perceptible in every sector of the chamber. Suppose that it were feasible to produce a specific mode of undulation which should affect the oxygen alone without disturbing the nitrogen. That undulation would essentially still be sensed in every part of the room. If we allow, for a moment, that the proportion of oxygen might be greater in one section of the room than another, then the oscillation, though perceptible everywhere, would be most potent in that section. Just as the air in a chamber is composed of oxygen and nitrogen, so is the matter of the solar system composed of these differing types. And just as a wave which affected only the oxygen or only the nitrogen would nevertheless be felt in all parts of the room, so a movement or modification which affects only one of these types produces an effect throughout the entire solar system, although it may be stronger in one region than in another. This proposition holds true for all worlds, but for the sake of clarity, let us for the moment confine our contemplation to one world only. Perhaps the concept is most readily followed with regard to the astral. It has frequently been elucidated that in the astral body of man, matter belonging to each of the astral subsections is to be located, and that the proportion between the denser and the finer varieties indicates the extent to which that body is capable of responding to coarse or refined desires, and thus serves, to some degree, as an indication of the stage to which the man has evolved himself. Similarly, within each astral body, there exists matter of each of these types, and in this instance, the proportion between them will demonstrate the disposition of the man, determining whether he is devotional or philosophic, artistic or scientific, pragmatic or mystic. The living centers. Now, each of these types of matter in the astral body of the solar deity functions to some extent as a separate vehicle, and may be conceived as being also the astral body of a subsidiary deity or minister, who is simultaneously an aspect of the deity of the system, a species of ganglion or force center within him. Indeed, if these classifications exhibit variance among themselves, it is attributable to the fact that their constituent matter originally emanated through these distinct living centers. Furthermore, the substance of each category remains the exclusive vehicle and expression of the subsidiary deity through whom it was derived, such that the minutest thought, motion, or alteration of any nature within him is instantaneously mirrored, in some manner, throughout all matter of the corresponding. Classification. Naturally, each such species of matter possesses its own particular affinities and retains the capacity to vibrate under influences which, in all probability, would elicit no response from the remaining categories. Since every human being encompasses within himself matter of all these varieties, it becomes evident that any modification within, or action preceded by, any one of these great living centers must, to some extent, impact all beings within the system. The degree to which any specific individual is thus influenced is contingent upon the proportion of the affected matter type which he happens to possess within his astral body. Consequently, we observe distinct types of men, analogous to the types of matter, by reason of their constitution, by the very composition of their astral bodies. Some are rendered more susceptible to one influence, while others respond more readily to another. These categories number 7, and astrologers have frequently assigned to them the appellations of certain planetary bodies. Each primary type is subdivided into 7 classifications, for each planet may exist in a state practically uninfluenced, or it may be affected predominantly by any single one of the remaining 6. In addition to the 49 definite subtypes thus derived, there exist a myriad of possible permutations and combinations of influences, frequently of such complexity that their analysis proves no trivial undertaking. Nevertheless, this provides a definite system of classification, in accordance with which we may arrange not merely human beings, but also the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms, as well as the elemental essence which precedes them in the order of evolution. Every entity within the solar system pertains to one or another of these 7 great streams, forasmuch as it has emerged through one or another of these great force centers. To this source, therefore, it belongs in essence, although it must inevitably be influenced, to a greater or lesser degree, by the others as well. This endows each man, each animal, each plant, and each mineral with a certain fundamental characteristic which remains immutable, sometimes symbolized as his note, his color, or his ray. This characteristic persists not only throughout a single chain period but throughout the entire planetary scheme. Thus, the life which manifests through elemental essence of type A shall, in the due course of its evolution, ensoul successively minerals, plants, and animals of type A. Furthermore, when its group soul fragments into units and receives the third outpouring, the human beings resulting from its evolution shall be men of type A and none other. Under normal conditions, they shall continue as such throughout their development until they mature into adepts of type A. In the nascent days of theosophical study, we labored under the impression that this design was executed consistently to the ultimate conclusion, and that these adepts rejoined the solar deity through the selfsame subsidiary deity or minister through whom they originally came forth. Subsequent research indicates that this conception necessitates modification. We ascertain that bands of egos of diverse types unite themselves for a common objective. By way of example, in the investigations connected primarily with the lives of Alcyone, it was discovered that certain bands of egos circled about the various masters, drawing nearer and nearer to them as time progressed. One by one, as they became eligible, these egos attained the stage at which they were accepted as pupils or apprentices by one or another of the masters. To become truly a pupil of a master signifies entering into relations with him, the intimacy of which far transcends any bond of which we are cognizant on earth. It implies a degree of union with him which no language can fully articulate, although, simultaneously, a pupil retains absolutely his own individuality and his own initiative. In this manner, each master becomes a center of what may be truly described as a great organism, since his pupils are veritably members of him. When we realize that he himself is, in precisely the same manner, a member of some yet greater master, we arrive at the conception of a mighty organism which is, in a very real sense, one, though constructed of thousands of perfectly distinct egos. Such an organism is the heavenly man who emerges as the result of the evolution of each great root race. In him, as in an earthly man, exist 7 great centers, each of which is a mighty adept, and the Manu and the Bodhisattva occupy in this great organism the locus of the brain and the heart centers respectively. Around them, and yet not merely. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.